Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Health Wealth podcast. We've got another episode here for you, which is going to be packed full of education and information again on nutrition. And I've got a very special guest today, which I'm looking forward to speaking to. We have Andre Obradovic, who is a certified primal health coach based in Australia. And we're going to be speaking to him today about some of his expertise he's going to be sharing with us. So, first off, Andre, welcome to the show, and how are you today?
Oh, good morning or good evening for you, and good morning for
Yes.
me. And I'm good, thanks. And thanks for any of those people or any of your listeners tuning in. I'm good today. It's 7 a.m. here, and the sun is out, and it's starting to get a bit warmer here because we're in spring and we're getting close to summer. And I'm assuming it's quite cool in England.
Yes, you're getting the better of the weather, I can assure you that. Yes. Yeah, it's heading cold over here.
Yeah.
So first off, give us a little background on what it is you do.
Sure. Okay. So for the last 10 years, I've been running my own health and wellness coaching business. Um, and that started from the fact that I was worn out, exhausted, and I guess the typical 48-year-old man working a big job, following conventional stupidity, as I call it. And what that means is I was paying a dietitian $200 an hour to keep me fat. And I was listening to a doctor that was saying, don't eat fat. You need to just exercise more and make sure you eat a balanced diet. And the problem is I was already running 70 kilometers a week. Um, my my calves were so sore, and at the time I thought it was just because I was running so much, but I realized it was actually inflammation from eating all those carbs that I was told to eat, and eating all those carbs because every running magazine and fitness article, which no one should ever follow, was telling me to make sure I had X number of grams of carbs for every hour when I was running a marathon. So 10 years ago, I was 80 kilos. When I realized I was following what I call conventional stupidity, I stopped eating all the rubbish that I was told to eat by doctors and dietitians, and I dropped to 65 kilos within 6 to 8 months. And I've been between 62 and 67 for the last 10 years. So that's my personal sort of part of it. But I realized that when I lost all my weight, friends started asking me, "Oh, how did you do that?" And I started just helping them for free. And at the same time, I was really not enjoying my massive corporate job that I had. So I decided to go and do my leadership coaching certification. So I went and did ICF, International Coaching Federation coaching course, so I could do executive coaching because I wanted to leave the corporate world where I was working for the man, and I wanted to work for myself coaching executives on leadership. But what happened was I did all my certifications for coaching, and I realized that I could bring that into my own health coaching, so I could combine the executive coaching and the knowledge I had from doing my own, transformation into a business. And I started that. And along the way, I did the Primal Health Coaching certification as well with the Primal Health Institute, founded by Mark Sisson. And if people don't know who he is, they should look him up. And I then did other certification courses as well. And I started doing my own, health coaching for people 10 years ago. And since then, I've helped over 600 people, mainly men, through one-on-one coaching to not follow conventional stupidity and actually get healthy. So I run my own coaching business where I help people with weight loss, all through low carbohydrate nutrition, help improve their sleep, make sure they're doing appropriate exercise, and we can talk about what that is later on as well, because most people get that wrong. Um, and I guess in the last 10 years, I've also, as a part of that transformation, I've run, I think, 18 marathons, all pretty much low carb, except for the first three where I was sucking down all the carbs and I was overweight running. I've done, I think, 16 half Ironmans, and I compete in athletics, and I can still run 5Ks in 21 minutes, 10Ks in 44 minutes at 58. So this whole change in food and understanding that as I got older, I didn't have to get fat and sick, has really changed what I do, because I'd normalized being overweight, because all of our friends are generally, and we think, oh, well, that's what happens when we get old, but that's total bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you. That's as you say, everyone makes an excuse and puts it down to aging. When you start getting the aches and the pains and gaining the weight, and it's not at all. So that's brilliant. That's brilliant. You've got as I said at the beginning, you've got a ton of expertise and experience that people are going to be able to learn from. So was there a particular thing that put you onto the whole low carb? Was there a point where you kind of was like, I've had enough, I'm looking into this myself? How did you get into it?
Yeah, well, I think when I turned when I turned when I turned 50, my running coach, because I was just running and I was always sort of sore and inflamed, and I'd started to lose my weight. Um, my running coach said, "Oh, there's this guy from America, a Dr. Stephen Finney, coming out to Australia, and he talks about low carb and paleo, and then there's a guy in Australia, Pete Evans, who some of your people might know about. He's a famous chef, but media doesn't really like him because he talked about COVID stuff,
Yeah.
um, and he started a big paleo movement as a chef. So I'd started following paleo, and I was already sort of starting to look at that. But then I went and saw this talk from this guy called Stephen Finney at a hospital in Melbourne, and it was just before Christmas. And I went to the session, the wrong session. He was doing a session for athletes to teach them about low carb nutrition, and he was doing a session for diabetics. So I walked into this lecture hall at a hospital, and almost everyone in the room was overweight. And I'm like, oh, I'm in the wrong place. But I listened to the talk, and then at the end, I had a conversation with him and bought his book. And I went home and I said to my wife, okay, this is it. I'm sick of being a fat prick. I'm going to stop eating bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, bananas, cereal, and I'm going to start eating more fat and protein, and drop the rice and the pasta and all of that stuff. And this was just before Christmas. So I think it was about 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, I dropped all of those, what I call simple carbs, those simple carbohydrates before Christmas. So I had Christmas dinner almost carnivore style with some green vegetables, but I didn't have all the yummy potatoes and the bread and the cakes and all of that. So that really got me into changing my food. It was the questioning of, I'm doing this and it's not really working, and I'm sick of looking in the mirror and being a fat prick. And then going to that talk, really, I thought, well, I'm going to try this and just see what happens. And it was the best thing, one of the best things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. I think it's people getting to that point, isn't it, where they realize that there's so many people out there that are doing the same thing and it's not working. It's not making any difference. They're going to their doctor, they're listening to the nutritional advice they're given, and they're getting nowhere. And you've got to reach that point where you say, okay, maybe it's wrong. Maybe I should try something else and give something else a go. So how soon did you start seeing benefits as well? You decided you were dropping all that stuff. You're like, nah, had enough of that. Did you start seeing some good results straight away?
Within weeks. Yeah,
Yeah.
within weeks, I'd started losing weight. If someone told me that I could do that, I would never have believed them. Like, that's what I say to my clients. Last week I signed up a new client. He needs to lose 30 kilos. He's sort of in his 50s. And I said to him, I guarantee you, if you can't lose between 8 and 16 kilos in 12 weeks, I said, there's something wrong. And I I sort of said, this will be the best thing you've ever done in your life. And at the start, people are, but then within a couple of weeks, they're like, oh, my brain's so switched on. I'm so more effective at work. I'm starting to lose my gut, my man boobs, and, I had a client once who paid me, I charge a couple of $1,000s, right? For 12 weeks, right? And this client sent me 10 grand at Christmas as a thank you.
Oh,
About 6 months after he finished, because he said he never, ever would have thought it was possible in his life to lose 24 kilos.
yeah. I agree. I was chatting recent episode we did. I don't know if you might know him as well through LinkedIn, Ricky Duplessis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was, and we was that was one of the things we spoke about was just that, we kind of got to understand that it does sound too good to be true, doesn't it? All the benefits you get, it almost sounds like it's made up, and it's not until you try it that you realize that no, it actually is this good. So I think the battle is just getting people to try, isn't it? Once they're on it, they start to feel the benefits.
Well, here's something that struck me is I'm going to see my doctor who's overweight himself, and he's saying to me, "Oh, you need to exercise more and stop and not eat fat." And I'm like, "Well, that's what I've been doing, and it doesn't work." So why, like I say to people, why would you go to a personal trainer that doesn't have the body you want to have? Why would you go to a doctor who's overweight if you're going to a doctor to be healthy and lose weight? Or a nurse or a dietitian? There's a lot of dietitians that are women, dietitians mainly, because there's not many men. And a lot of them, as they're older, they're overweight. So why would you actually go and see them? Because you would think that they would know what to do to have better body composition. But they're just following the standard American, standard Australian, standard Western diet. And if they tell people to, you know, eat low carb, they'll get sacked. In fact, one of my clients in Tasmania, a great guy, and he'll watch this podcast. He's my age, so 58. He hadn't been under 100 kilos for 40 years.
Wow.
Right. So he was like, I think he was like 128 or 134 kilos when we started. Within 16 weeks, he's down into the 94s, 96s. And he
Wow.
went back to his dietitian and she said, "Oh my God, what have you done?" And he said, "I've been eating low carb. I've got a professional coach." And she said, "Oh, that's great. That's how I eat. But I can't tell you that because I'll lose my job." So this is the thing people need to understand, like, the government, our Western governments are not going to go and change their dietary guidelines and say, "Oh, sorry, people, sorry to all those diabetics and obese people that have been following the food guidelines because that's actually made you sick." They'd have a class action on their hands. So they're never going to change the food guidelines because, the food companies, the nutritional boards, the big processed food companies pay scientists to sit on these boards and make recommendations. So you think they're going to recommend not eating vegetable oils and not eating grains when that's what the companies sell? Like, people, this is true. This is how it works. If you look at all the people that give the dietary advice to these national dietary or nutrition reviews, at least half of them do study and grants that get paid for by the big food companies. So you got to actually open your eyes and say, "Oh, this is wrong." And it's not a conspiracy. I'm not like that. I'm just saying, like, open your eyes and be smart and think about what the hell you're shoving in your mouth. Because I thought I was always going to be fat because everyone in the office was, and everyone in the street is.
Yeah.
But now I've got 8 to 10% body fat, and it never changes. And it's all just because I stopped being stupid.
Yeah. Exactly. It's all about money is how it all works and goes round, isn't it? They're not interested in making you healthy. They're interested in making money and making profits. Which I suppose as a business you could say is kind of, despite the fact it's kind of immoral the way they do it, it's kind of what a business is meant to do. And as you say, we need to wake up and realize they're not telling you things because it will help you, make you healthy. They're telling you things because they want to make money. And we've got to make our own choices on what's healthy and what's not, and actually look into it. You know, when there's obviously a great example recently is the research on diabetes and red meat that come out from Harvard this week, which is, you know, just a load of rubbish. And you only have to look into the research and the data for about 2 minutes to realize how much of a scam the whole thing is. But most people are too lazy to do that, and they'll just take it. Red meat causes diabetes. I better cut down on my red meat. And, you know, we've got to start, as you say, actually using our brains and thinking, and not just believing everything we're told. I mean,
Yeah,
like you.
Sorry, you go.
Okay, so I was just going to say, like you said, with people going to, you know, unhealthy doctors and overweight dietitians, and people just see the title and think, well, they must know what they're talking about. They don't look at the health of the person. You know, look at the person as an example, and, you know, if they're not in the health you want to be in, don't listen to them.
Well, I would never go to a personal trainer if I was going. If I want to cut up my abs, and I was going to a personal trainer that was fat or chunky or didn't have abs, what? It just makes sense. Like, do
Yeah.
you want to go and buy a house? You look at the house; it's a shit house. The foundations are weak. The paint's not done. Why would you go to that builder?
Yeah.
Like, if I want to build my body, I'd go and get advice from Arnold Schwarzenegger, not not Danny DeVito.
Yeah, absolutely. It's common sense, isn't it? But people have lost it. People have lost their common sense, and it's a crazy world that we're in, and people just don't think about it. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you've been doing this 10 years now, and when it comes to things like low carb and carnivore and keto, you know, people always say about you know, you can't do it long term and there'll be negative effects and stuff like that. So how have you found it over doing it over that long term period of time, and has there been any negative effects you've had?
Oh, look, it's been the best thing I've ever done. I've been eating like this for nearly 10 years. I eat 2 meals a day. Some days I have 3 meals. That's my treat, where I actually go out socially and might have that first meal of the day. I never say breakfast, because the other thing your listeners need to understand is breakfast, morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner. Those terms have all been made up by the food industry. Breakfast cereal, well, that wasn't a real thing. It was just like eat your first meal, right? So um, I found it very easy to do, and it's now just routine. And that's what most of my clients find, is they just get into this routine of eating clean, and sort of negative effects. At one stage, I was quite stressed with some things going on in my life, and fasting till 12 o'clock and exercising a lot in the morning wasn't really probably that healthy at that stage, because I had high cortisol, and I lost a lot. I dropped down to like 62 kilos, which when I'm 62, I don't look as healthy. So I think for people that have got a lot of stress in their life and have adrenal fatigue, we can talk about that as well if people don't know what that is. I think that's where they need to be a bit more mindful of not fasting as much, because when we fast, our body can think we're in a stressed state, or if we're exercising hard, and most people do exercising the wrong way, that can put their adrenal glands on higher alert, pump more cortisol into the body, and cortisol stops us burning fat and makes us crave sugar. So for me, one of the negative things when I was exercising really hard and when I was really stressed was I probably wasn't eating enough. But that would have been the only. Oh, and the other thing is, um, some of the friends I had at the time were big drinkers, and it would be hard socially to sort of have functions with them when they were having pizza nights, or it was all chips and different foods, and I would turn up and I would not eat it. So socially, and that's what I help people sort of deal with in the coaching practice as well, those issues around social activities, because it can put people off. So I guess I stopped socializing with some people because of the shit food they were eating, and that I wasn't that comfortable with it. And then I'd say things about it, and that put people off, because I was in the early stages, I was pretty dogmatic about it. Whereas now it's like, well, if you don't want to eat healthy, that's your problem. It's not my job to convince you. I'll save that for the people that are paying me money. Well, in fact, people that come to me, I don't have to convince them. They just come to me saying, I want to, the pain is so great. Here's some money. I need help. You know, they already are convinced.
Yeah.
And the positive things are my blood levels are really good. You know, I'm running much better than I was. I sleep well. I've got between 8 and 10% body fat. And as a 58-year-old, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that surely at 58 with 8 to 10% body fat, you must be in the top couple percent of people your age, I would imagine, for health and fitness for that, definitely. Let's quickly, while you're talking about the adrenal fatigue, let's quickly pick up on that, because obviously on the show we talk a lot about diet, but there's all the different parts of your life that you need to balance for good health, don't you? You know, your sleep and your stress. So if someone is suffering from adrenal fatigue, or they think they might be, what are some of the telltale signs that would kind of signal to people that they could be suffering from that?
Oh gosh. You know, lethargic, exhausted, tired, waking up 2 or 3 times a night and not being able to get back to sleep. That's the cortisol in the body. Um, there can be a whole lot of stuff, and adrenal fatigue can move into further diseases that affect the whole body. I think the issue is it's not necessarily a disease that doctors know much about. There's a really good book I'm going to grab from here, actually,
Yeah.
on the bookshelf. This is there you go, seeing we're
Okay.
talking
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
it. They're called Adrenal Fatigue. Um,
This is we
so
did see
that,
it there for a second.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good book by James L. Wilson, and it talks about immune resistance, vitality, enjoying your life. So, um, you know, I guess you asked me what are some of the things that make you realize that you have got, adrenal fatigue. Well, if you need coffee. So when you wake up in the morning and if you can't function without coffee, that's one of the big problems, because you're using coffee because your adrenal glands can't fire up and produce that cortisol. Craving salt, craving sweet snacks, libido being significantly reduced, sexual dysfunction, um, just being tired and not really being motivated to do much stuff. Some of
Yeah.
the key things, but coffee and struggling to get out of bed in the morning are two of the key things, because we're supposed to have higher cortisol in the morning when we wake up because we're getting ready for the day. And if our adrenal glands are constantly trying to work these hormones, they get exhausted, and that's what happens. They're sort of like these little warning radars sitting on top of our kidneys, and they're the final sort of protection mechanism for our body that are always, if they're always switched on and alert, we exhaust them, and that's called adrenal fatigue. So a lot of veterans, I'm a veteran as well, but a lot of veterans, emergency service workers, people that work in hospitals that are always in this fight or flight state because of the dramas they're facing can easily get exhausted adrenals. And the problem is, in Australia, there's no medical code under our health system to diagnose it. So you wouldn't really go to a doctor to get adrenal fatigue addressed. It would be, you'd have to find an integrative health specialist, a health coach, or a naturopath, and then they do saliva tests and different tests to look at, what's happening with your different hormones. Endocrinologists can run the tests, but they're not going to necessarily know how to deal with adrenal fatigue.
Yeah. And firstly, what did you do to address it personally? And if you have a client suffering from adrenal fatigue, what's some of the best things you advise them to address it?
Um, so I didn't I wasn't diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, but I knew something was wrong. So I did some saliva tests, and I had a nighttime saliva test to check for cortisol and melatonin because my sleep was badly impacted by all of this. And my cortisol was off the charts, my melatonin was really low. And you can't have good sleep if you've got high cortisol. So did some saliva testing to look at what was going on. And then I started a protocol. My wife's a nutritional therapy practitioner. So I started a protocol using um, glandular supplements that had lamb pituitary, lamb hypothalamus, and lamb adrenal glands in them, plus phosphatidylserine, which is for brain function. Plus, I was taking a supplement that had a lot of Asian sleep herbs in it, plus a little bit of melatonin. So they were the sort of supplement regime, because there's a thing called the HPA axis. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No, I don't think so.
All right. So there's a communication pathway called the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And that communication path is there to protect us. So the brain has memories of what situations have caused us to be stressed or in fight or flight in the past. And our hypothalamus then communicates with our pituitary gland to sort of say, there's a problem here. Andre's about to go in a dangerous situation. You probably need to do something about it. Then the pituitary gland sends messages down to the adrenal glands to say, danger's coming, you need to produce more cortisol, right? So when we're in this constant stress state, and I had this big corporate job for years where I was flying overseas everywhere. It was a big sales job. I was always, up doing emails till midnight, in bed till 5 a.m. So I was getting 5 hours sleep. So I was in this constant fight or flight state, like some veterans are and emergency services workers. So this communication pathway just goes on a loop, and it just because you've been on it so long, it just continues to cycle, and it always thinks you're in this stress state, even though you may not be. So we have this dysfunction, and we've got to stop that from happening. So you can use supplements, you can do nasal breath work, you can do meditation, you can do cold showers, you can just connect with nature, do meditation and be calmer, and that helps. But you've got to also look at how to improve that function by having these glandulars, and they sort of reset the body. As you know, if you eat offal or organs, they improve the function of that organ. So I take, myself, I take prostate gland, testicles, liver, bone marrow, brain, kidney, all that sort of stuff in supplements as well, because they help the function of all of those parts of the body. Does that answer your question about adrenal fatigue?
Yeah, no, that does. That's good pointers for, if I'm sure if there's people who will have recognized symptoms you said there, and that's something they could look into and try and implement some of those things you said there. So that's good. One of the things you also mentioned there was coffee when you were talking before. Now I know that's quite a it's quite a touchy subject for a lot of people. What's your views on coffee? Do you try and tell people to steer clear of it, just to have a little bit? What's your view on it?
Well, I've never drunk coffee ever. Um, and that's because, long story, but in a short story, it's because my mum used to smoke and drink coffee all the time. And then she had a stroke when I was 9 and died when I was 12. And that
Oh
whole
wow.
smell of smoke and coffee just associates me with bad memories. So I've never drunk coffee. And I drink Rooibos tea, which is a tea that has no caffeine in it, because I had to get a saliva test, as I've said. And when I had that saliva test, I couldn't have tea, and I had to do 4 tests during the day, so I couldn't have tea at all. And by lunchtime, I was shaking, and I said to my wife, "Oh, I feel really weird." And she goes, "Why?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And she said, "How many cups of tea have you had today?" And I said, "None." And she said, "How many would you normally have?" Because, she wouldn't see how many times. And I said, "Oh, probably 6 to 8." And she said, "That's because you're having too much caffeine."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I drink rooibos tea, and the only time I drink normal tea, now that I'm out of adrenal issues, I might have a normal English breakfast tea, once or twice a week if I go out to a cafe with someone. At the time, I used to actually take my own tea bags. It was that bad because I had to have this Rooibos tea because it
Yeah.
had no caffeine in it. But what do I say to other people? Well, the first thing I say is if they're going to drink coffee, they need to get rid of the milk because lattes and cappuccinos are one of the worst things for losing weight. So if you want to lose weight, you shouldn't be drinking all that milk, and you shouldn't really drink milk anyway, in my opinion. Um, so milk is a problem with coffee, and so I say if you need to have a coffee, have a black coffee or a black coffee with a touch of milk in it. But I say if you're having a problem with sleep, you shouldn't be drinking coffee after 12 o'clock. If you wake up at 6 and you need a coffee to function, I just say to them, what do you think about that? And they half the time they don't know what to say. And then I say, well, if you wake up and you needed some cocaine to get going in the day, what do you think about that? And they say, well, that's a drug. And I'm saying, yeah, well, coffee is exactly the same. It's doing a function in your body to elicit cortisol and function when what's supposed to do that can't do it. So that means there's actually a problem with your body's functioning, and you're using coffee as a drug to make that work. And don't give me the bullshit that, I love coffee, it's so nice. It's like, it's just this, I think it's this bullshit trend of, I've got to have a coffee every morning, because you can't walk the dog without holding a coffee cup. What the hell? Like,
Yeah.
I see all these muppets outside the cafes lined up to get their morning drug, and worst case, it's full of milk.
Yeah. I think
Especially all these. I might offend people here, but all these people in their um, leggings, sitting there with their leggings, big fat ass sticking out of their leggings, and whatever, drinking all these coffees with milk and their croissants. Well, maybe that's why you've put on weight or you've got a fat ass.
exactly. Coffee's become more of a social thing than anything else, hasn't it? They as you say, it's just they have it for a social reason, like just a routine. Got to have my coffee, and yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
If you can't start your day without a coffee, that is a sure sign something's wrong. I'm like you. I've never drunk coffee. I'm a tea man. Especially with my day job being as a carpenter, I used to drink. I could go through 10 teas in a day, but now I have them rarely now because I've cut back as well, and I've seen benefits from that. So I just I have them now and again. But yeah, coffee. I say to people because it's hard, isn't it? A lot of people are addicted. A lot of people are really need it. So I try and encourage people to cut down as much as possible and see what benefits they get. But yeah, getting people
Yeah.
to let go completely is quite hard.
Well, it's the same like alcohol. We could have a whole conversation about alcohol as well. Like nearly every man I work with has a problem with alcohol.
Yeah.
And I honestly think, like I say to people, I say, we're just going to sort the food out. For the first couple of weeks, we're just going to get you to stop eating shit and stop snacking. Because, my first week of my program is I do a food journal. People do a food journal and a mood journal. So what do they normally eat? How do they feel? Are they bloated? Are they tired? Are they exhausted? Do they have energy? All of that sort of stuff. And we talk about that, and then I say, right, we're going to get ready for the first week now to eat properly. And I say to them, the first thing I want you to do is simply stop eating shit.
Yeah.
So they eat off a food list I give them, a Banting food list. And then I say, in week 2, once they've sort of got the food right, then we say, okay, now we need to look at alcohol, sleep, etc. And alcohol is a big social problem, especially in Australia with our culture, and it's all tied in with social activities, expectations, especially people from the country that have had farms or whatever. They're very, in Australia, people generally, you won't have people over unless you're serving alcohol. And especially in the country, I've had people that said, well, it's exactly what my mum and dad used to do. Every time people would come, we would serve alcohol. we didn't have anyone come over without having alcohol because you'd be considered rude. And I've got several male clients that really struggle with this. It's a massive issue. It takes a lot of work on them. The food is the easy thing because they say, I love the food. I love eating, ribeyes for my first meal at lunchtime, during the day with eggs. I nail the food. I love the food. I'm not hungry. I'm losing weight. But to get them to actually really think about alcohol. So I do a lot of questioning around what sort of example are you setting for your kids? So as an example, if I can keep going on this, if that's all right, is I've got one client who has a lot of kids. They're in this religious, group that but they just have big families, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But he's got a 24-year-old daughter himself, and then he's got two 8-year-old daughters. And this man is a lovely man, but he really struggles with not having alcohol and feeling that he's more fun in a group when he has alcohol. And you're just being polite. If you don't drink, people think there's something weird going on. But I said to him, okay, well, what if your 8-year-old daughter, when she turns 25, says exactly the same thing? What advice would you give to her if she said, oh, Dad, I'm going out with X and Y people this weekend where, I really don't want to drink too much, but I'll feel uncomfortable drinking? And he said, well, you just say to them, you're not drinking. But he can't do that himself.
Yeah.
And I said to him, listen, I said, what you got to think about is big picture is your 8-year-olds are going to be exactly like you, because 5 nights a week, you and your wife are drinking wine with dinner 5 nights a week. And every time you go to a function, the kids see you and all the adults always drinking alcohol. And it doesn't matter if you're having 1 glass or 3. The fact is they associate every time there's a social function. Part of being a good host is to serve alcohol and make sure people have alcohol. I said, that's teaching your 8-year-old that that's normal, and she's going to do exactly the same thing. Is that what you want? He goes, no. I said, well, you've got to set a better example yourself. You're a great man. You've got a big business. You look after your family. You love your family, but you and your wife's behaviors are setting the tone for what your young kids are doing, because his 24-year-old daughter, who's a lovely girl, she's exactly the same, except I helped her make the decision in her head that this wasn't serving her. So it's a huge problem. And I spent a lot of time on this whole discussion with men, especially ex-rugby players, football players, because everything's associated with alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's getting them to see it from that point of view. I think a lot of people, and I think it's kind of similar with food, that, with alcohol, people think that if you're not an obvious raging alcoholic, people think that they're fine. They don't have an issue. Like people who are addicted to carbs, but they're not massively obese, so they think they don't have a problem. Until you ask them to, you say, oh, could you not eat sugar for a while? They say, yeah, fine, I could go without chocolate for a bit. But you say, no, could you take out pasta, pizza, rice, bread, all of that? And for some people, there's no way they could do it because they're addicted. I think it's the same with the alcohol. They think they're fine, but they couldn't. If you couldn't imagine yourself going without it, you've got a problem.
Well, that's exactly what I say to people. I say, if can you go without alcohol if your doctor said to you, you have to stop drinking for a month, otherwise, you're going to be helped. That'd be really hard.
Yeah.
And then I say, oh, actually, okay, so tell me how this is. I say, how old are your kids? And they say 8 years old. I'm like, okay, so I say to them, well, you're 50 now. How old will your kids be when they get married? And they say, oh, I don't know, 28, 30. Okay, so let's say it's 20 years. So you're 50 now, you're going to be 70 when your kids are getting married. And they say, yeah. And I say, okay, so tell me, what's going to happen if you're 120 kilos now, your doctor's told you you're pre-diabetic? What are you going to be like? What's your life going to be like? What are you going to look like? How are you going to feel when you're at the marriage of your kids, how are you going to be if you don't make some changes and realize you're being an idiot? And they're like, And then I say, I'll tell you, you're going to either be in a wheelchair with one leg because you're going to have one leg cut off because you've got really bad diabetes. You're going to be in a hospital and you won't be able to go because you'll be on a kidney dialysis machine. You'll have cancer because cancer requires sugar to grow. Look up Otto Warburg, the Warburg effect. Or you're going to be dead just because you want to drink alcohol 5 nights a week and you don't want to say no to eating pasta and rice because it tastes nice. That's what your life is going to be, and that has a bit of an effect sometimes. So
Yeah.
you've got to ask people these hard questions and make them think, because no doctor, maybe 1% of doctors would talk to a client like that.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't have time.
No, they don't, do they?
And a lot of them don't know what to say or how to say it. It's like, oh, you've got thyroid disease, here's some thyroxine.
Yeah, that's it.
Don't change how you're eating.
They're mainly trained to prescribe medications, aren't they? They're not trained in nutrition, and they don't understand all the stuff around it. So they just, they do their job and they prescribe the pills, and that's all they really do.
Yeah. Well, I call it the sickness industry. It's not the health industry. You and I work in the health industry.
Yeah.
They work in the sickness industry.
That's true. That is true. I've said that a couple of times about people who've been, trying to, you say stuff and you get people coming back at you trying to give hate and saying you don't know anything, and you're not a doctor. And I say, well, how often is your doctor curing conditions? That they don't cure them. They just give you, pills to manage them. But anyway, that's a whole nother discussion for another time. Let's jump into, because I do want to get onto this bit as well that you mentioned earlier about exercise, because exercise is a really important thing on health, and you said about a lot of people exercising wrong. So what do you think is the right way to exercise, and what are some of the main mistakes that people are making?
Well, okay, so first thing with exercise is we have to make sure that when we exercise, we have to think about someone's background, their experience in exercise, their history, and their sort of skill. So people that go to the gym at 6 o'clock, and here's a typical thing. Someone comes to me and says, oh, I'm going to the gym every morning at 6 o'clock, working out. It's fantastic. I kill myself. We do high fives. We get our heart rate as high as we can, burning heaps and heaps of calories. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I say, how long have you been doing that? Oh, a year. Oh, what are the results? Oh, I've lost 2 kilos. And I'm like, okay, so, and you need to lose 20. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so maybe think about, is that actually helping you? And what ends up happening is they're listening to the idiot personal trainer who's like, oh, as long as you burn this many calories, we can go and have a coffee and you can have pancakes or whatever, because it's this many calories, it's full of sugar, but no one cares. They don't make the connection, right? Yeah. So the first thing about exercise is people need to understand that exercise is not there to lose weight. Exercise is there once you've lost your weight to cut up, right? So at the moment, I'm personally trying to cut up a bit more so I can see more abs. That's what I'm exercising for, but I'm also being a bit more religious with my food. But once you lose your weight, exercise is then how you get that, better 5%, so to speak. But there's a method. Well, hang on, before I go on to that. So the other thing you need to take into account is people's age, right? So exercise for someone that's 20 kilos overweight is simply walking the dog for an hour after dinner or in the morning. So exercise has to be appropriate to the person's background and their condition. Like if I had someone who's 20 kilos overweight and they say, oh, I want to run, I'd say, no, just focus on your food. Because what tends to happen is people say, oh, they don't have time to eat properly, and then they want to add exercise in. Well, actually, nail the food first, because that's the way you're going to lose your weight more than exercise. And people find that really hard to deal with.
Yeah.
But your question about people exercising too hard is if we look at this as this is really easy exercise and this is maximum effort. There's that area called the gray zone, which is sort of in here. And this is where most people exercise. And this gray zone is what we call zone 3, zone 4 exercise. It's where you can't talk while you're exercising. You're struggling to talk. It's hard. You're often sore. But that's what people associate with, oh, I'm working hard. I'm doing the right thing. I'm burning a lot of calories. This will make me fitter. The problem is all that does is elicit more cortisol because we're breathing through our mouth, we're exercising hard, our body thinks we're running away from the saber-toothed tiger. So what does it do? It elicits more cortisol. It stops fat burning. It makes us crave sugar. It inflames our body. So this whole gray zone training area of, hard exercise is what's causing more damage, especially if we're carrying excess weight. What we should be doing is, the problem is most people don't exercise easy enough at this end, and they don't exercise hard enough at this end, right? So what we should be doing is we should be following this approach called the Maffetone method. Dr. Phil Maffetone, he trained Mark Allen. He won the Hawaii Ironman 6 times. And Phil Maffetone did research over many years with thousands of his athletic clients, and he built a process called the MAF method, M-A-F. You can look it up. There's lots of videos on it. And that's the way I train, and that's the way I coach all my athletes. And what that says is your aerobic exercise function or your aerobic heart rate isn't 220 minus your age and then all these percentages. It's actually 180 minus your age, right? So what that means is for someone that's 50, your maximum aerobic heart rate is 130, which means you have a range of 120 to 130, where 80% of your exercise should be in that comfortable range, where you can talk, where you can breathe a little bit through your nose, and it's comfortable. Because what this is doing is building a big diesel engine. It's optimizing our fat burning. So we'll burn the fat that's in our cells, the fat that's in our triglycerides, the fat that's in our liver. We will not induce a cortisol spike, a stress spike, because when you're exercising at a comfortable heart rate, your body doesn't associate that with danger. The other thing is most people don't exercise at the other end, the really hard end. They don't do sprints, like 6-second, 10-second sprints. They don't do it because they exercise in that gray zone. And for most people, that sprinting would be dangerous because they wouldn't know how to warm up properly. They wouldn't know how to do running drills, strides, activations to make sure our glutes are activated. So they wouldn't actually do that sprinting. And if they did, like in these fitness classes, they wouldn't have the appropriate recovery, because you need to actually have a long recovery between sets if you're doing sprinting, and you need to activate and prepare properly. So exercise can be anything from walking the dog to swimming to going to the gym and doing strength training, resistance training, running, jogging, bike riding, but it has to be appropriate to the person's age, their background, their weight, their body composition, their musculature, and their experience with how to exercise and how to manage it. So it's quite a complex thing. But my first thing to anyone would say, if you're overweight, probably 10 to 20 kilos, you shouldn't actually be running. You should actually just be getting up and going for long walks, put a pack on and walk up hills, walk upstairs, and try and manage your breathing so your heart rate is lower.
Yeah. Especially when you're that overweight, like you said, the battle's won in the kitchen, in terms of the weight loss, isn't it? That's your first goal. And then you could build the exercise on top. In terms of if you were trying to get into the high exercise, the really working hard, could you do that from doing weights and resistance training, or is sprinting one of the few things that will get you there?
You wouldn't get your heart rate as high doing resistance training as maximum effort sprinting.
Yeah. Okay. So you're best to have your sprints as that small portion of the maximum heart rate, and then all your other exercises should be on the lower end, the more comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, that's interesting. That's really good. I've heard of the math. I haven't looked into it that much, but I have heard of it before, being mentioned by people. So,
Yeah,
I'll look into that more.
I'm one of the founding coaches. So I'm on his
Okay.
website as one of the initial coaches that was trained in the method. And that's how I do all my training. So as an example for your listeners, I ran a marathon during COVID against the law. I went away from home more than 5 kilometers and I did 325 and my average heart rate was 125. And I did it fasted, just one drink of water on the way. And I was fasted as well. So combining that low carb approach, and that was my fastest marathon I've ever run. And I did it by myself. But my average heart rate was like 125 for a 3-hour 26 marathon.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. I've heard a lot of talk within exercise and nutrition space that any exercise done you fasted gives you much better results. Doing it fasted rather than eating before. Obviously, the old with carb loading and stuff, people say you need to eat lots before, but I've seen a lot of people, even on, like you said, with the marathon yourself, and other people talk about Ironmans, that doing it fasted, they've hit PBs and done much better than they had done when they were loading up with food.
Well, so there's a saying: train low, race higher. So what you want to do is you want to train your body to be able to cope with low carbohydrate nutrition, so the body optimizes the ketone production and fat burning. And then as you're getting into a race, you don't do what we used to do, which was carb loading, but you would eat a little bit more sweet potato as an example. So my go-to would be sweet potato, and I'd eat a little bit of that a couple of days before, but not like a big pasta carb loading. So I'd be eating fish and meat and vegetables, but a little bit more sweet potato. And then in a race, I would have some gels that were a low carb gel, but I would only have them in a race because my body would really then use that in the final stages of the run where I was pushing hard, as an example, because you're racing 5 hours, 5.5 hours. But it's a whole process where you have to train your body to get used to that. So it's totally different to the normal approach. So it's like training low on lower carbs till your body gets used to it. And then when you have a race, that's a long race. Like I'd never need any carbs or gels for a 10K run. 40 minutes, it's nothing, but 5.5 hours can be a bit much. And sometimes that extra food that you have can help you just break through and be more balanced and calm and have your body functioning a bit better. But you don't need to do that when you're training all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. On the subject of food and carbs. So obviously I mean, I eat carnivore, so I don't have any carbs or plants in my diet. I think you're a low carb approach, aren't you? So what are some of the good vegetables or some of the good carbohydrate options that, if people wanted to keep some carbohydrates in their diet and keep some plants in their diet, what are some of the good options you would recommend?
Oh, basically green vegetables. So, broccoli, cauliflower is not green, but I call it a green vegetable. Green beans, spinach. If you weren't overweight, sweet potato, because sweet potato still has sugar in it, but it has got good fiber to help with bowel movements. So I sort of say to people, anything that's not grown in the ground is usually low carb. So anything that's grown above the ground, green beans, broccoli, cauliflower, silver beet, spinach, lettuce, cucumber, all that sort of stuff is grown above the ground. And, they're good things to eat for people that maybe don't want to go carnivore. Some people have problems with bowel movements if they don't eat enough vegetables, which can be a bit of a problem. I do eat, some days I just eat meat and eggs. Um, not every day, but like usually one of my meals will just be meat and eggs, and then one meal a day I'll have salad or vegetables with mine. Um, but yeah, green vegetables are the key that people should be eating if they're eating a low carb diet, and avoiding potatoes, sweet potatoes, anything that's sort of grown underground.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that said that underground and overground vegetables are quite different in the terms that the underground are the ones with a lot of starch and a lot more sugary. What about do you have any fruit in your diet? Do you recommend people eat any fruit like berries and the lower glucose content ones?
Well, if people are trying to lose weight, I say they should avoid fruit. If they need to have some fruit, a couple of berries,
Yeah.
strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, but that's about it. And no bananas, no apples, no oranges, because they're just full of sugar. And people are, oh, but they're healthy. Yeah, okay. So I say to them, how many bananas do you eat a day? Two. I'm like, okay, well, that's one reason why you're fat, because it's 10 teaspoons of sugar, 5 teaspoons of sugar in each one, you know. And I
Yeah.
say, are you hungry 2 hours later? Yeah. I said, okay, well, have two boiled eggs and tell me if you're hungry 2 hours later.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I used to eat tons of fruit. I loved it. I don't eat any now, obviously, but yeah, and you could eat it forever. Like fruit never fills you up, does it? It just
No.
you could eat it absolutely forever. So yeah, I steer clear of it, but I know that, if someone wants to include some, like you say, berries are, normally the best option because they're the lowest sugar content of it. But yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with understanding how much sugar is actually in fruit because, like you say, they think it's healthy. It's
Mm.
healthy sugars. That's what they
Yeah.
normally come
Yeah.
out with. I don't know if
Yeah.
you know or heard of, there's Dr. David Unwin, based in the UK.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. He does a lot of graphics. He posts on Twitter where they'll literally show like how many teaspoons are in, the different things like the bananas and whatever. And it's trying to get people to understand, how much sugar they're actually eating, and that inside their body, sugar is sugar. It doesn't matter, doesn't matter where it came from. Yes,
Yeah.
some of the other stuff that comes with it can be different, but sugar's still sugar.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Okay. I've completely forgotten what I was going to ask you next. Now I'll just.
That's all right.
It was something along the eating lines, but I've completely forgotten it. But anyway, it'll come back to me at some point. We'll just carry on for now. I did have another
Okay.
question in my mind. So you talked about you normally have 2 meals a day, sometimes three. So obviously, majority of the time, you're kind of doing some form of intermittent fasting, I guess. As you say, I'm kind of similar to you that I try and eat intuitively now. I don't have a strict regime I have to stick to. When you're working with clients, do you encourage them to start with some kind of intermittent fasting, or do you just get them to kind of eat intuitively as well?
Uh, well, what I do first off is I say, all I want you to do is put food in your mouth 3 times today for the first week instead of six, and eat off the green list. So the first thing is to get them to just stop eating the shit, bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, vegetable oil, processed foods, muesli bars, all that sort of stuff. I get them to stop eating that and just eat 3 meals a day. And then within a couple of weeks, we'll do a call, and I'll say, oh, on the system it looks like you didn't eat anything this morning. They go, yeah, I wasn't hungry. And I'm like, okay, good. Now you just go to 2 meals a day, and do that. Eat between 10:30 and 1, and then eat it between 6 and 7. So yesterday I was busy. Yesterday I exercised in the morning at the gym, and then I didn't eat yesterday till 1:30. So I encourage people to have 3 proper meals a day, and then as soon as they feel like they're not hungry, then to not eat and go to more of a intuitive time. But most people end up doing what I do, which is 2 meals a day, 6 days a week, and then one day a week they might do 3 meals if they're going out just to do a social thing. So as an example, I allow myself one piece of bread once a week, and that's usually on a Saturday morning. I go and catch up with some guys. So sometimes I'll do a park run on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, and then I'll go to a cafe with some guys I know, and that's when I'll have my 3 meal a day. I'll have breakfast and I'll have one slice of sourdough with eggs and bacon and avocado and halloumi or something. But I generally, 2 meals a day is fine. And some days I don't eat. I have a smaller eating window where I only eat between 3 and 6.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I think a gradual approach, I think, is good for people because, as you say, I think once you start to give your body the right foods, it becomes quite easy to listen to your body, and your body starts to give you quite clear signals. Whereas when you're eating all that rubbish, as you say, you haven't got a chance. You know, you filling yourself with all these toxins and with sugar. There's no way you're going to be able to listen to your body at all. And while you were talking, I remembered the other question I was going to ask. So, what's your view on dairy? Do you have much dairy in your diet? Do you advise people to stay clear of it?
Right. Well, I eat a lot of butter.
Same here, yeah.
Right. But that's about butter and a little bit of cheese, but that's it. The problem is, have you ever heard of leaky gut?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So leaky gut can be caused by a protein called casein, which is a protein largely in dairy or milk, and also gluten. So often you'll see when people do their food diary that they do with me, they'll be eating croissants or cheese and ham toasted sandwiches because who doesn't love a cheese and ham toasted sandwich, right? But it makes you fat. And cappuccinos, and then they'll have a runny bowel movement. And on the days they don't. And I say to them, what do you think? How long have you been drinking milk? Like we've got one client, a female, she's had diarrhea for 20 years. She's actually got like Hashimoto's or something, so thyroid disease. And no doctor ever explained to her why she's got thyroid disease. No doctor ever said to her, if you got leaky gut, which then leaks those pathogens into your bloodstream, which then go and affect the thyroid, which then cause antibodies to go everywhere. And this is why your thyroid's in a mess. No one ever explained that to her. And she's had diarrhea for 20 years. I was coaching her husband and she was there, and I explained this to her, and now she's become a client. But all they did was say, well, here's medication.
Yeah.
So to answer your question about dairy, I recommend people go off most dairy except for butter and cheese. And if they need to have milk, they should only have full cream milk and only a little bit, because full cream milk is probably better than almond milk because it has all those vegetable oils and different chemicals in it. Because I feel that leaky gut is a big issue, and that protein of casein leaking through the gut lining can cause a lot of health issues. So I try and I have a lot of guys that come and drink these big chocolate milks and these protein drinks that have all this milk in it. And I'm like, oh my God, that's like, oh, the guy at the gym said I need to do this, Yeah, they're then having diarrhea all morning,
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. As like you, butter is most of all I have, sometimes some cheese, but not that much. I mean, have you seen some of the work from who's it, Medicina in Hungary and Dr. Sophia Clemens? So that there's an medical institute in Hungary that they're based on they have the paleo, it's like a paleo and ketogenic diet mixed together, and they're very against dairy. She talks a lot about, within the carnivore space, some people get quite carried away with dairy, and she talks a lot about the issues it can cause, and that you have to be a bit careful with it because a lot of autoimmune conditions can come from dairy. Some people might be fine with it, but it can be problematic. So yeah, I try and avoid it. What do you think of, like, some people go with the fermented dairy and they have the kefir and things like that. What do you think, it's fine when it's fermented that much, or do you still steer clear of that?
No, kefir, I think kefir is good, but I wouldn't. Yeah, kefir is good. Fermented vegetables, kimchi, things like that are good for gut health. But dairy is just, apart from butter and a bit of cheese, I try and avoid it completely
Yeah.
because they are right. It causes this autoimmune dysfunction
Yeah.
that leaks through the gut lining of your wall, and it causes a whole cascade of health problems. But
Yeah.
like I say, no doctor will ever tell anyone that. Like doctors don't know what leaky gut is. They might have heard about it, but they can't prescribe. They can't say this is a chargeable health. Like everything has a
Yeah.
code. If you got the flu, it's this code. If you got this, it's this. There's no billing thing for adrenal fatigue or for leaky gut.
Yeah.
So a naturopath or an integrative health specialist are the only people that can really treat it.
Yeah. Yeah, and leaky gut is the base of a lot of conditions, isn't it? That people suffering with autoimmune conditions, pretty much all of them come from it. Like you were talking about thyroid one with Hashimoto's and things like that. And if they treated the root cause of the leaky gut, then they could, reverse most of those conditions. But as you say, that all they do is they have the condition and they just give them pills to help them with that. And the pills make the leaky gut even worse because then they break the membrane down even more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a vicious circle, and it's a shame really because people trust the medical system, don't they? We're brought up to blindly trust it. You think they have your best interests at heart, and people keep going along with it, and it's doing a lot of harm to people, and it's quite hard to wake people up to that, which is really sad, really, when you think about it.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm sure doctors do want to help people,
Mm.
but they're
Yeah.
not trained. They're not. I coached a doctor. There's a video of a doctor called Mark on my website, and he actually was a client of mine.
Yeah.
He said it's the best money he's ever spent. He said he was never taught anything about nutrition in medical school, and he was going to start doing this with his clients. And he's a doctor.
Yeah. That's it. You see a lot of them who talk openly about the fact that they didn't know anything. They were following their own advice, and that they only came to the truth once they investigate it for themselves. That doctors within the low carb movement, and Dr. Sean Baker, Ken Berry, Anthony
Ken
Shafee, people
Berry,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah, that they had to go and they learned it themselves. Like Ken Berry he was massively overweight, taking his own advice, and he thought this is wrong. I've got to. So they're not trained in it, as you say. They don't know any better than we know, and you've got to go and look at it yourself, research it yourself
Yeah,
to find out
yeah.
how it actually works. Yeah. I don't want to take up all of your day, all of your time. I really appreciate the time that you've given us. It's been very educational for me, and I know it's going to be educational for people listening as well. So I just want to thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for coming on. And hopefully you've enjoyed yourself.
That's right, Ryan. No, it's been great. I hope your listeners have got something valuable out of it. And I guess I just encourage them to, especially if they're a bit older, like you're probably what, in your 40s?
36,
Oh, well, nearly. Yeah, okay.
nearly
Sorry. Yeah, okay.
heading that way.
As you're getting older, I'd like you to challenge your beliefs you have about alcohol, about health, about body composition. And, you know, if you're overweight and you're sore and you don't sleep well and you're exhausted, think about if that's how you want to be for the rest of your life. Because 80% of it is about what you put in your mouth. And just think that just because I am like I am, it doesn't mean you have to continue like that. Like I said, 10 years ago, I was 80 kilos. And when you're 5'6", that's not obese, but it's overweight. And, for 10 years or so, I've been now 62 to 66 kilos, in that range. And it's not hard. It's very easy. So challenge yourself about where do you want to be in 5, 10, 20 years when your grandkids are there, when your kids are having in their wedding. Because you can make a change if you want to. You've just got to actually, as David Goggins says, go hard.
Yeah.
You got to challenge what you've learned. You got to relearn what you've learned. Then you've got to have a plan and you've got to execute it. So it's no good just knowing what to do. You got to actually know what to do. You got to allocate the time to do it, to cook food instead of eating shit food at McDonald's on the way to work down the M5, or what's the big freeway in England called?
Yeah,
Is it the
the
M?
M1.
M1, yeah. So instead of stopping at McDonald's, getting your coffee and your burger because you haven't had time to eat in the morning or you're starving, actually think about it and make boiled eggs or make a frittata the night before and take that to work and have that. Or, people say to me, I love kebabs. I can't eat kebabs on this diet. I say, yes, you can. You just go and you say, I want a tray with meat and salad. I don't want the bread. How can you? Oh, can you do that? Yeah, go and ask. They'll do it without the bread. They'll charge you the same, so they're making more money. So yeah, just challenge yourself. Get out in the sun. Don't be scared of the sun. Stop drinking milk. Reduce your coffee. Get earlier to bed, and try and eat offal if you can. That's about it for me.
I think that's great advice, a great summary to finish. And yeah, I think people need to challenge themselves, open their minds, and not be afraid to learn new things. I think that's a brilliant summary you've done there. So again, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time. There's plenty more we could have chatted about. We could always have another chat in the future. You'd be more than welcome to come back. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, if your listeners find it useful and they've got questions and they want me to come back on, just let's make that happen, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will see you again next week, and let's get optimal together. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into the show. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover on the podcast, or you'd like to appear on it, then please contact us at hwpoduk@gmail.com, on our website, which is healthwealthuk.com, or on any of our social medias, which are at hwpoduk. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share it with all your friends and family, and we will see you next week.